In exactly 37 seconds, Harper Williams's life would split into two parts, before and after. Before Chase Johnson grabbed her dress. Before 30 phones started recording. Before her fist connected with his jaw in a way that would shatter more than just his pride at Lincoln High School. What nobody knew about Harper Williams could fill a police report. What Chase Redwood was about to discover would fill a hospital bed. The morning of October 15th started like any other Tuesday at Lincoln High School in Riverside, Ohio. Students shuffled through Washington Hall with that particular blend of teenage exhaustion and drama that had become the soundtrack of American high school life. The smell of industrial floor wax mixed with cheap cologne and anxiety, creating an atmosphere that somehow managed to be both suffocating and electric at the same time. Harper Williams had been invisible for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days. Not that anyone was counting, except her, at 17. She possessed the kind of gentle demeanor that made teachers forget her name despite her perfect grades. And classmates look right through her, despite sitting in the front row of every class. Her auburn hair always pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her clothes simple and second-hand but clean. Her presence so unremarkable that she'd become background noise in the symphony of high school social chaos. What nobody knew was that beneath those flowing fabrics and soft cardigans lay the lean, battle-tested physique of someone who'd spent 5 years learning how to make grown men tap out in under 90 seconds. The calluses on her knuckles weren't from excessive note-taking. They were from training at Johnson's Martial Arts Academy every Tuesday and Thursday since she was 12 years old. The unusual way she carried herself wasn't shyness. It was the controlled awareness of someone who'd been taught to read threats before they materialized. Her father, Staff Sergeant Williams, had insisted on the training after his deployment orders came through. "Baby girl," he'd said in that gentle voice that could command a platoon or comfort a scared child. "I won't always be here to protect you, but I can teach you to protect yourself." He'd died defending a convoy in Afghanistan when Harper was 14, leaving behind a Purple Heart, a folded flag, and a daughter who'd learned that real strength wasn't about size or volume. It was about precision, timing, and knowing when silence was survival and when it was surrender. Her mother, Nancy Williams, worked double shifts at Miller's Diner and evening shifts at County Hospital to keep their small apartment and Harper's academic dreams alive. The scholarship to Lincoln High was everything, a ticket out of the cycle of working-class struggle that had defined their lives since the military death benefits ran out. Harper carried that weight on her shoulders like armor. Heavy, but necessary. Protective, but isolating. Chase Johnson ruled Lincoln High through a carefully cultivated empire of fear disguised as popularity. His 6'2" frame and aggressive charisma made him the kind of student that teachers loved for his athletic achievements and secretly dreaded for his psychological games. At 18, he'd perfected the art of dominance through humiliation, knowing exactly which buttons to push and which lines never to cross when adults were watching. The Golden Boy facade was flawless student body president, homecoming king, quarterback with a full ride to Ohio State already secured for next fall. His father, Robert Johnson, owned the largest car dealership in 3 counties. His mother served on the school board. Their family donated enough money to Lincoln High that Chase's name was literally etched on a plaque in the front lobby. But beneath the perfect smile and letter jacket lived a 17-year-old boy drowning in expectations he couldn't meet. The secret Chase guarded more carefully than nuclear codes was his dyslexia. Every A that Harper Williams earned effortlessly was a reminder of his own academic struggles. Every time she raised her hand with the right answer was another brick in the wall of inadequacy that threatened to crush him. While she read Hamlet like poetry, he needed specialized software and tutors he couldn't admit to having. While she wrote essays that teachers used as examples, he spent hours crafting single paragraphs that still came back marked with corrections. His crew consisted of Mason Davis and Tyler Brooks, two followers who fed off Chase's energy like remora fish following a shark. Mason was the enforcer, all muscle and misplaced loyalty, desperate for approval from the alpha who'd accepted him into the inner circle. Tyler was the recorder, always ready with his phone to capture moments of triumph or humiliation for their private group chat and public social media dominance. The escalation had been building for weeks, each incident carefully calculated to stay just below the threshold of official complaint while maximizing psychological impact. It started small comments about Harper's perfect grades, whispered loud enough for her to hear, accidental shoulder bumps in hallways that sent her books scattering, social media posts mocking second-hand clothes and scholarship kids who acted like they belonged at Lincoln High. But today felt different, charged with the kind of electricity that preceded storms. The morning began with AP Literature in Mrs. Sarah Mitchell's classroom, where Harper's essay on social justice themes in To Kill a Mockingbird had earned a perfect score, while Chase's attempt at the same assignment came back with a C- and suggestions for improvement that read like a roadmap of his academic failures. "Miss Williams," Mrs. Mitchell announced to the class, holding up Harper's paper, "has written what might be the most insightful analysis of systemic prejudice I've read from a high school student. Her connection between historical injustice and contemporary social dynamics shows remarkable maturity and critical thinking." The praise hung in the air like incense, beautiful but suffocating for anyone who wasn't the recipient. Chase's jaw tightened as the class turned to look at Harper, who seemed to shrink smaller in her seat despite the compliment. Her cheeks flushed pink as she mumbled a quiet, "Thank you," and immediately focused on organizing her already perfect notes. The contrast couldn't have been starker: effortless excellence meeting desperate struggle. Scholarship, merit facing legacy privilege. Academic success highlighting athletic dependency. "You know what your problem is, Harper," Chase's voice carried across the classroom like a knife wrapped in velvet. "You think you're better than everyone else because you actually have to try." The words were carefully chosen, designed to sound like casual observation while cutting straight to the heart of every insecurity a scholarship student carried. Mrs. Mitchell looked up from her gradebook with the expression of someone who'd heard too many of these moments to ignore, but not enough administrative support to stop them effectively. "Mr. Johnson, please keep your comments focused on the lesson." Her voice carried in the weariness of a young teacher who'd learned that challenging popular students meant making enemies of powerful parents. "I'm just saying," Chase continued with that innocent smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Some people get perfect grades because they have perfect lives. No distractions, no responsibilities, no real-world pressure. Must be nice to live in that bubble." Each word was a precision strike designed to make Harper's academic success feel like cheating, her poverty sound like privilege, her dedication appear as detachment. Harper's response was silence, but her body language shifted in ways that only trained observers would notice. Her shoulders squared slightly, her weight shifted to the balls of her feet, her hands, which had been nervously arranging papers, became still and ready. These were micro-movements, combat preparations disguised as stress responses, invisible to everyone except someone who'd learned to read the signs of impending violence. The bell rang with the sharp finality of a judge's gavel, releasing 30 students into the chaos of passing period. Chase watched Harper pack her perfect notes into her worn backpack, noting the way she moved with unusual grace for someone supposedly clumsy and awkward. There was something about her that didn't add up, something that made his bullying instincts tingle with the anticipation of a challenge that might actually fight back. Washington Hall buzzed with the familiar energy of teenagers transitioning between classes, lockers slamming, conversations overlapping. The constant soundtrack of notifications from phones that weren't supposed to be out, but always were. Harper navigated the crowd like smoke, there but intangible, present but unnoticed. Part of the background fabric of high school life that most students never bothered to examine closely. Her locker was strategically positioned near the back corner of the hall, away from the prime real estate where popular kids claimed territory and close enough to the library entrance that she could disappear quickly when necessary. She'd learned the art of institutional invisibility, how to exist in spaces without occupying them, how to be present without being seen, how to survive in environments designed for people with louder voices and bigger shadows. Chase appeared beside her locker like a storm cloud, suddenly and with the promise of destruction. Mason and Tyler flanked him in formation, creating a semicircle that looked casual but effectively blocked escape routes. Other students began to slow their passage through the hallway, sensing drama the way sharks sensed blood in water. Phones emerging from pockets like flowers blooming toward sunlight. Harper. Chase said her name like he was tasting something unpleasant. We need to have a conversation about respect. His voice carried just enough volume to attract attention without alerting teachers. A skill he'd perfected through years of psychological warfare conducted in plain sight. I'm going to be late for class, Harper replied quietly, her voice steady but small, like someone speaking from the bottom of a well. She continued organizing her books with methodical precision, each movement controlled and deliberate, giving no indication of the calculations running through her mind as she assessed angles, distances, and escape routes. Class can wait, Mason interjected with the confidence of someone who'd never faced academic consequences for his actions. Chase is talking to you. His tone carried the implicit threat that ignoring the alpha was social suicide, that refusing to engage would result in escalation that would make this moment seem gentle by comparison. Tyler's phone was already out, not yet recording, but positioned for optimal coverage when something worth capturing occurred. He'd developed an instinct for viral moments, understanding intuitively when teenage drama was about to cross the threshold from mundane to shareable, from forgettable to forever. You think you can just ignore me? Chase stepped closer, using his height advantage to loom over Harper's smaller frame. Nobody ignores Chase Johnson at Lincoln High, especially not scholarship kids who forget their place. The words were designed to establish hierarchy, to remind everyone within earshot that social order existed and violation would be punished. Harper closed her locker with deliberate calm, the metallic click echoing louder than it should have in the sudden hush that had fallen over their section of the hallway. When she turned to face Chase, something had shifted in her posture, subtle but unmistakable to anyone who knew how to look. Her spine straightened, her center of gravity lowered. Her hands hung loose and ready at her sides. "My place," she said quietly, each word articulated with crystal clarity, "is wherever I choose to stand." The response wasn't defiant, it was simply factual, delivered with the kind of calm certainty that suggested she'd already calculated the cost of whatever came next and found it acceptable. The hallway held its breath, 30 students frozen in the tableau of confrontation, sensing that something significant was about to happen, but unable to predict exactly what form it would take. Teachers were conveniently absent, either genuinely occupied with their duties or practicing the willful blindness that kept their jobs secure in a district where athletic donations mattered more than academic safety. Chase's face cycled through surprise, anger, and calculation as he processed Harper's unexpected response. This wasn't the cowering submission he'd expected. This was something else entirely. Something that made his predator instincts simultaneously excited and wary. He'd spent 3 years perfecting his ability to break students like Harper. Quiet ones who relied on invisibility for protection. Who bent rather than fought back. Who understood that resistance meant escalation they couldn't win. "Your place," he repeated slowly, savoring the words like wine he was about to spit out, "is wherever I say it is. And right now, I say it's on your knees, apologizing for thinking you're special." His voice dropped to a register that was almost conversational, the kind of tone that made threats sound like friendly advice and made witnesses question whether they'd actually heard what they thought they'd heard. The crowd pressed closer, phones emerging like weapons, the promise of drama overriding the fear of being caught recording. This was the moment when teenage social media instincts overcame survival instincts, when the desire to capture content superseded the wisdom of avoiding crossfire. Harper looked around the circle of faces, seeing the mixture of anticipation, fear, and voyeuristic excitement that had become the hallmark of her generation's relationship with conflict. These were her classmates, kids she'd sat beside in classes for 3 years, who'd borrowed pencils and homework assignments, who'd shared the mundane experiences of high school life. Now they watched her like entertainment, waiting to see if she would break or bend, collapse, or fight back. "I'm not apologizing," she said simply, the words carrying across the hallway with perfect clarity. "For being good at something you're not." The statement hung in the air like a match thrown into gasoline. Factual, inflammatory, and utterly transformative. Chase's mask slipped completely, the carefully maintained veneer of popular sophistication cracking to reveal the insecurity and rage that lived underneath. "You little bitch," he snarled, loud enough that several students took unconscious steps backward, sensing that the situation had just crossed a line from which there might be no return. The lunch bell chose that moment to ring, flooding Washington Hall with students heading toward Jefferson Cafeteria. The crowd around Harper and Chase swelled from 30 to over 100 in a matter of seconds, creating the kind of audience that turned private moments into public spectacles and transformed individual conflicts into social media events. Chase grabbed Harper's backpack strap, not hard enough to be called assault, but firmly enough to establish physical dominance. "You're coming with me," he announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We're going to finish this conversation somewhere. Everyone can see exactly what happens to kids who don't know their place." Harper allowed herself to be guided toward the cafeteria, not because she was submitting, but because she recognized the tactical advantage of choosing her ground. Jefferson Cafeteria was the beating heart of Lincoln High's social ecosystem, the place where hierarchies were established and reputations were made or destroyed. If this confrontation was going to happen, and she could see now that it was inevitable, better to face it in a space where there would be maximum witnesses and minimal escape routes for her opponents. The cafeteria buzzed with the familiar chaos of lunchtime, 500 students divided into the tribal affiliations that defined high school social structure. The jocks claimed tables near the windows, the theater kids gathered around the vending machines, The honor students huddled in the corner with their textbooks and anxiety. The social media influencers positioned themselves where the lighting was most flattering for their constant documentation of teenage life. Chase steered Harper toward the center of the room, where an empty table sat like a stage waiting for a performance. The crowd followed, phones already recording, conversations quieting as word spread that something big was about to happen. This was the moment when individual drama became collective entertainment, when private pain transformed into public spectacle. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chase announced with the showmanship of a carnival barker, "I want everyone to witness what happens when scholarship kids get too comfortable at Lincoln High." His voice carried across the cafeteria with practiced authority, drawing attention from every corner of the room, ensuring that what happened next would be seen by maximum witnesses and recorded by multiple devices. Harper stood in the center of the impromptu arena, surrounded by concentric circles of her peers, feeling the weight of 500 gazes pressing down on her like physical force. This was the moment she'd spent 3 years trying to avoid. The exposure she'd feared would destroy the careful anonymity that kept her safe. But as she looked around at the faces of her classmates, some excited, some fearful, all waiting for her to break, she felt something unexpected rising in her chest. Not fear, but clarity. Not panic, but purpose. Not the urge to flee, but the recognition that sometimes running wasn't survival. It was surrender. Chase circled her like a predator playing with prey, his voice carrying across the silent cafeteria as he began his public humiliation ritual. "You see, Harper here thinks she's better than the rest of us because she gets perfect grades. But grades don't mean anything in the real world, where people like my family create jobs for people like her family." Each word was designed to establish hierarchy, to remind everyone present of the economic and social dynamics that truly governed their community. "I want everyone to understand something," Chase continued, his voice growing louder and more confident as he fed off the attention. "There are students who belong at Lincoln High, and there are students who are here because we allowed them to be here. Harper needs to remember which category she falls into." And the cafeteria was so quiet that the hum of the vending machines sounded like thunder. 500 teenagers holding their collective breath as they watched a social execution being prepared for their entertainment. Phones were recording from every angle, ensuring that whatever happened next would be preserved forever in the digital archive of teenage cruelty. Harper felt the familiar surge of controlled adrenaline that had once carried her through sparring sessions with opponents twice her size. The clarity that came when training took over from thinking, when instinct replaced analysis. She looked at Chase's confident face and saw something that surprised her, not a monster, but a frightened boy desperate to maintain an image that was slowly crumbling under the weight of his own insecurities. "You're right about one thing," Harper said quietly, her voice somehow carrying across the silent cafeteria despite its softness. "There are students who belong here, and students who are here because their families bought their way in." The words hit like bullets, precise, devastating, and utterly unexpected. Chase's face went through several shades of red before settling on a dangerous purple. The public nature of the challenge made retreat impossible. His entire social identity was built on never being disrespected, never being challenged, never being made to look weak in front of his subjects. "You want to play that game?" he snarled, stepping so close to Harper that she could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the particular scent of teenage rage. "Let's see how smart you feel when everyone sees what happens to little girls who don't know when to shut up." He reached for her dress, not her arm or shoulder, but the fabric itself, grabbing a handful of the simple blue material that represented everything about Harper he wanted to destroy. The gesture was intimate and violent simultaneously, designed to humiliate and expose, to reduce her to an object rather than a person, to demonstrate his power over her body as well as her social status. The fabric tore with a sound like thunder in reverse, instead of warning of the storm, announcing that lightning had already struck. In that moment, as 500 phones recorded and 500 voices gasped, Harper Williams felt the last thread of her old life snap. The invisible girl who'd hidden her strength for 3 years, who'd endured whispers and slights and casual cruelties in the name of keeping her scholarship safe, who'd believed that silence was survival and invisibility was armor. That girl died in Jefferson Cafeteria at Lincoln High School. And from her ashes rose something that would make Chase Johnson and his empire of fear wish they had never learned her name. The 37 seconds that would change everything were about to begin. The sound echoed through Jefferson Cafeteria like a gunshot, the distinctive rip of fabric that announced the moment when everything changed forever. 500 students went silent simultaneously, phones instinctively rising toward the center of the room where Harper Williams stood, with her dress torn diagonally across the front, exposing the simple sports bra underneath that spoke of someone who dressed for function rather than fashion. For exactly 3 seconds, time suspended itself in Jefferson Cafeteria. 500 teenagers processing what they'd just witnessed, their phones recording a moment that would be replayed millions of times across social media platforms that thrived on teenage trauma transformed into entertainment. Chase Johnson's face showed triumph turning to uncertainty, the satisfaction of public humiliation beginning to curdle as he registered something unexpected in Harper's expression. This wasn't the collapse he'd anticipated, the tears and shame that had marked his previous victories over students who'd dared to challenge his authority. Instead, Harper Williams stood perfectly still, her breathing controlled, her posture shifting in ways that made alarm bells ring in the primitive part of his brain that recognized predators. In that moment, Tyler Brooks would later tell investigators, everyone saw it. The way Harper stood, the way her hands positioned themselves, the way her eyes went from victim to something else entirely. Chase reached again, overconfidence driving him forward when survival instincts should have pulled him back. "Look at you now," he sneered, grabbing for her torn dress. "Not so perfect anymore, are you?" His hand extended toward her shoulder, fingers spread to push her down, to complete the humiliation ritual that had worked so effectively on every other target. Harper moved. The motion was so fluid, so economical, that most witnesses would later swear they'd missed something crucial. One moment, Chase was reaching. The next, his wrist was trapped in Harper's grip, his own momentum being redirected with surgical precision. The classic Krav Maga technique her father had taught her on a Saturday morning that felt like yesterday and forever ago. The same movement she'd practiced 10,000 times in the academy, where Johnson's martial arts had prepared her for exactly this moment. Chase's hand connected with the edge of the lunch table, not from his own force, but from Harper's redirection of his energy back into himself. The impact produced a sound like a baseball bat hitting concrete, followed immediately by his howl of pain and surprise as he realized his wrist might actually be broken. "What the hell?" Mason Davis charged forward, loyalty to his alpha overriding any tactical assessment of the situation. At 200 pounds of misplaced aggression, he represented the kind of brute force challenge that required different solutions than Chase's psychological warfare. Harper's response was textbook perfect, a sidestep that used Mason's momentum against him, followed by a gentle push that sent him careening into Tyler Brooks. Both boys crashed into a nearby table, scattering lunch trays and creating a cascade of food and chaos that drew gasps from the surrounding crowd. The entire sequence took 11 seconds. "My father taught me two things before he died defending this country," Harper announced, her voice carrying across the silent cafeteria with crystal clarity. "How to protect myself. And when it's necessary." She paused, looking directly at Chase, who was cradling his injured wrist against his chest. "Congratulations, Chase. Today was necessary." The cafeteria remained frozen in tableau, 500 students processing what they'd just witnessed, their phones capturing every angle of the moment when Lincoln High's social order had been completely overturned. The quiet girl, the scholarship kid, the invisible one who'd never caused trouble or drawn attention. She'd just systematically dismantled three of the school's most powerful students without breaking a sweat or raising her voice. Tyler Brooks, tangled in the wreckage of overturned chairs and scattered food, managed to keep his phone steady throughout the entire encounter. The video he captured would eventually reach 15 million views. But in that moment, he was simply a 17-year-old boy trying to understand how everything he thought he knew about strength and weakness had just been proven catastrophically wrong. "Holy shit," someone whispered from the crowd, and suddenly the spell broke. Conversations erupted from every corner of the cafeteria, students pulling out phones to share videos that were already uploading to TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat simultaneously. The hashtag Lincoln High Fight would be trending within 20 minutes, but the real story was still being written in the faces of everyone who'd witnessed Harper Williams' transformation. Principal Rebecca Taylor arrived in Jefferson Cafeteria like a force of nature, her heels clicking authoritatively across the tile floor as she surveyed the scene of overturned tables, scattered food, and three male students in various states of distress. Behind her came Coach Mike Wilson, Officer David Miller, and Dr. Jennifer Clark, the administrative response team that descended on Lincoln High whenever student conflicts crossed the threshold from disciplinary to potentially legal. "Everyone back to your tables," Principal Taylor commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 20 years managing teenage chaos. "If you're not directly involved in this incident, you need to clear the area immediately." Her eyes took in the scene systematically. The torn dress, the injured wrist, the overturned furniture, and most tellingly, Harper Williams standing calm and composed in the center of it all. Officer Miller, a 20-year veteran of school resource duty, approached Harper with the careful neutrality of someone trained to de-escalate situations before they spiraled further. "Miss Williams, are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" His voice carried genuine concern, the recognition that teenage conflicts could have adult consequences when they escalated to physical confrontation. "I'm fine, thank you," Harper replied quietly, her hands smoothing the torn fabric of her dress with unconscious dignity. Though Chase might want to have his wrist examined, she looked toward where Chase sat nursing his injury, his face cycling through pain, embarrassment, and dawning recognition that his reign of terror had just ended in the most public way possible. Dr. Clark knelt beside Chase, her trained eye immediately recognizing the signs of a potentially serious injury. "Can you move your fingers, any numbness or tingling?" Her questions were professional and efficient, but Harper could see the wheels turning behind her eyes as she processed the implications of what had occurred. "She attacked us," Mason declared from his position on the floor, blood from a split lip making his words slightly slurred. "Harper just went crazy and started hitting people for no reason." His attempt to reframe the narrative fell flat in the face of 50 phone recordings that clearly showed him and Tyler charging Harper while she'd remained stationary. "That's not what happened," a voice called from the crowd. Riley Anderson stepped forward, her phone displaying the crystal-clear recording she'd captured from start to finish. Chase grabbed Harper's dress and tore it. She was defending herself. Other students began nodding, phones emerging to corroborate the testimony, creating an overwhelming digital record of exactly how the confrontation had unfolded. Principal Taylor's expression shifted as she realized the scope of what she was dealing with. This wasn't a simple school fight that could be managed with detention and phone calls to parents. This was a documented assault followed by self-defense. Captured from multiple angles and already spreading across social media platforms that would make Lincoln High's handling of the situation a matter of public scrutiny. "I need statements from everyone who witnessed this incident," Officer Miller announced, pulling out his official notepad. "And I need all video recordings preserved as potential evidence." The legal implications were becoming clear. What had started as teenage drama had crossed into criminal territory the moment Chase had torn Harper's dress in front of hundreds of witnesses. Coach Wilson looked like he'd swallowed something unpleasant. His star quarterback potentially facing charges that could derail not just his college prospects, but the entire football program's championship hopes. "Now, let's not be hasty," he began, his voice carrying the desperate tone of someone watching years of careful cultivation crumble. "Boys will be boys. Surely we can handle this internally without involving outside authorities. Boys will be held accountable." Dr. Clark interrupted sharply, her years of counseling assault victims making her particularly sensitive to attempts to minimize sexual harassment. "What happened here today was not boys being boys, it was assault, captured on video, with over 100 witnesses." Harper listened to the adult conversation swirling around her, noting how quickly the focus had shifted from her actions to the institutional implications of Chase's behavior. This was the moment she'd feared for 3 years, when her carefully maintained invisibility would be stripped away and replaced with scrutiny she couldn't control. But instead of the terror she'd expected, she felt something unexpected relief. The secret was out. The facade was dropped. The quiet girl who'd hidden her strength was gone forever. In her place stood someone who'd refused to be a victim, who'd chosen action over silence, who'd demonstrated that power didn't always belong to the loudest voice or the biggest presence. "Miss Williams," Principal Taylor addressed her directly, "I need you to come to my office so we can discuss what happened here today." Her tone was carefully neutral, recognizing that Harper was technically the victim of assault, but also the student who'd physically injured 3 classmates in full view of half the school. "Of course," Harper replied, gathering her torn dignity around her like armor, as she walked through the cafeteria. Something remarkable happened. Students began standing up. Not everyone, not even most, but enough to create a visible wave of respect that followed her progress toward the door. Riley Anderson fell into step beside her, phone tucked away. Solidarity more important than social media content. "That was incredible," she whispered, her voice carrying 3 years of suppressed admiration for someone who'd just done what she'd never had the courage to attempt. The administrative office felt different when you entered as the center of a storm rather than as invisible background. Harper noticed details she'd missed in her previous visits to submit perfect homework or collect academic awards. The walls displayed photos of Lincoln High's successful graduates, mostly athletes and wealthy donors, with a token representation of academic achievers who'd earned scholarships to prestigious universities. Principal Taylor's office was a study in controlled chaos. Files stacked precisely. Awards displayed strategically. Family photos positioned to remind visitors that she was human beneath the administrative authority. She gestured for Harper to sit in one of the leather chairs facing her desk, the same seats where countless students had received discipline for infractions far less serious than what had just occurred in Jefferson Cafeteria. "Harper," Principal Taylor began, her voice carrying 20 years of experience managing teenage crises. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened today. Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out." She activated a digital recorder, the soft red light indicating that Harper's words would become part of an official record that could determine the trajectory of multiple lives. Harper took a breath, tasting freedom and responsibility in equal measure. For 3 years, she'd hidden her truth, spoken in whispers, made herself small to fit into spaces designed for people who took up less room. Today, that version of herself had died in Jefferson Cafeteria, leaving behind someone ready to claim her full voice. "Chase Johnson has been escalating harassment against me for weeks," she began, each word chosen with the precision her father had taught her to apply to combat situations. "Today he publicly humiliated me, tore my dress, and attempted to continue his assault when I defended myself using techniques I learned in martial arts training." The conversation that followed would be replayed in board meetings, legal consultations, and media interviews that transformed Lincoln High from a local institution into a national symbol of how schools handle bullying, assault, and the complex dynamics of power and accountability in American education. 3 months later, Harper Williams stood at a podium in Adams Auditorium, addressing an assembly of students, parents, and educators who'd gathered to hear her speak about finding your voice in institutions designed to keep you quiet. Her dress was new, purchased with money from the part-time job she no longer needed, thanks to the full academic scholarship that had resulted from the national attention her story had attracted. Chase Johnson sat in the back row, his wrist fully healed, his community service nearly complete. His understanding of consent and consequences fundamentally altered by mandatory counseling and the humbling experience of facing real accountability for the first time in his privileged life. 3 months ago, Harper began, her voice carrying clearly across the packed auditorium. "I believed that staying quiet would keep me safe. I learned that silence doesn't protect victims. It protects predators." She paused, looking out at faces that included students she'd never spoken to, teachers who'd never noticed her, administrators who'd learned that sometimes the quietest voices carry the most important messages. Every school has students who use power to hurt others, and students who suffer in silence rather than risk making their situations worse. But every school also has the potential to become a place where speaking up is supported, where defending yourself is celebrated, where being different is valued rather than punished. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes, but Harper measured success differently now. Success was Riley Anderson starting a peer counseling program, Tyler Brooks using his social media platform to promote anti-bullying initiatives, Mason Davis volunteering at the youth center, where he was learning to channel aggression into protection rather than domination. Success was Chase Johnson's genuine apology, delivered privately and without audience, acknowledging harm caused and changes made. Success was Lincoln High's new policies requiring bystander intervention training and anonymous reporting systems that had reduced harassment incidents by 70% in just 1 semester. But most importantly, success was measured in the messages Harper received daily from students across the country who'd watched her video and found the courage to speak up in their own situations, to report harassment, to defend themselves, to refuse to accept that silence was the price of safety. As Harper Williams packed up her speech notes and prepared to leave Adams Auditorium, she reflected on the journey from invisible scholarship kid to national advocate for student safety. The torn dress from that October day hung framed in her bedroom, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that sometimes the most important transformations begin with a single moment of refusing to accept what others define as inevitable. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Proud of you, baby girl. Dad would be too." Harper smiled, touching the dog tags she wore beneath her new dress, feeling the weight of protection that came not from hiding, but from standing up, not from silence, but from speaking truth, not from disappearing, but from taking up exactly as much space as she deserved. The quiet girl was gone forever. In her place stood someone who'd learned that real strength wasn't about size or volume. It was about knowing when to fight and having the courage to win. And in classrooms and hallways across America, students were learning that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand up and say, "Enough." Every voice matters. Every story counts. Every moment of courage can change everything for someone who desperately needs to see that heroes really do exist.